This is pretty good so far, but something about the main character could look a little more, interesting. Aw yeah, now we're gaming. The Metroidvania genre has gone through quite a bit of a trip in the last few years. It was considered the apex of modern level design by giving the player more freedom than the average linear game, and rewarded exploration of its world through character upgrades and wider customization. However, at some point the scales tipped, and the two games that the genre was named after went into what felt like an eternal hiatus, leaving a massive hole in the industry from the AAA side of things, especially with Castlevania. While things have gotten better as of late with the announcement of Metroid Dread, there was a large gap in time where indie developers were the only ones filling in the space that Nintendo and Konami left behind. And one of the more interesting titles that came from this era was Axiom Verge. Fun fact, this is my second attempt at reviewing this game. My first attempt was uploaded several years ago, and I enlisted said video because it was really short and not that good. Link in the description if you want something cringeworthy to watch. Anyhow... Axiom Verge was the brainchild of one Thomas Happ, who, in between working on AAA projects like Grey Goo, Tiger Woods, and NFL Streets, had worked on this game in his spare time, completely on his own. Yeah, this is one of those cases where we have a title whose sole development can be attributed to one man and his wacky ideas. After showing off early builds of the game, it was given a boost by Sony and released on PS4 in 2015, and then got a PC release a few months later. Now it's currently available on every major platform. The game starts with our protagonist Trace, working on an experiment of some kind only for a chain of reaction to cause a massive explosion. This would normally be the end of most people, but Trace wakes up in an alien environment with nothing to go on but a voice in his head telling him to find a weapon and to be wary of someone else finding him. You're then left to travel through this hostile world, with the hope of figuring out what's going on here and how to get out of this mess. Getting the elephant in the room out of the way is the almost admirable amount of inspiration that Axiom Verge takes from the first Metroid game. This goes from the bizarre creature design to the similar environments, only differentiated by the change of the primary colors, to even forcing the player to walk left to properly start the game. All of this works because the first Metroid game was used more as a base for new ideas, rather than just a free idea bucket. Getting past the feeling of familiarity, the visuals are pretty solid. The environments have some nice details that just sell how alien this world is, with much of the terrain having a pulsating look, to having its geology look like blood clots, blood vessels, or beating hearts. Other locations go for a more mechanical look, with some areas blending the two styles together, making the environments have a biomechanical look, which fit for the bosses located in some of these areas. So the game has a unique look, but there is the mild annoyance with the change of colors in the environments, which seem like less of a stylistic choice and more of an easy way to make two areas look different from one another. There are a handful of environmental details that add some variety, such as the sky in the mountainous region, or the aforementioned beating hearts in the background of another area, but the majority of the time it's just the simplistic hallways with alternate colored tiles, and that's a little disappointing. Though the primary aspect that makes Axiom Verge stand apart from the many games in the genre is the glitchy aesthetic. The small parts of the environment flicker, walls of buggy looking blocks keep you from certain parts of the level, and large chunks of rogue pixels make entire areas inaccessible. The one idea for Metroid that's executed extremely well here is the environmental storytelling. I'll go into more examples later, but one good example that comes to mind is in the mountainous region. You can see the skies off in the distance, but later on you learn more about a barrier called the Breach, located in the upper atmosphere of the planet, and when you gain access to the top of the mountain, you can actually see parts of the Breach in the background. It's a really nice touch. Though without a doubt, the peak of the presentation is the sound. The sound effects sell how alien this world is, with the noises that the environment gives off, along with the enemies in the game. It works pretty well in spite of those annoying parts where enemies with ear-piercing screeches repeatedly scream when they attack. Ugh. On a more positive note, a detail that I like is that every single alternate firing mode on your gun has its own sound effect, which, taking into account how many different firing modes there are in this game, it is rather impressive. It's some pretty solid stuff all around, though the high mark of this game's sound is the OST. I initially thought the soundtrack was average, with only a few memorable tunes, but upon this recent playthrough of the game, I found that a good amount of the soundtrack has really grown on me. Much of the soundtrack hits that nice middle ground between catchy melodies in some areas and putting a heavy emphasis on the atmosphere in others, with special mention going to that track in the last area of the game, which just slaps. Though I did run into one issue with how the music was used in the game, and that it doesn't seem to loop properly. For some reason, Axiom Verge has it so when a song ends, rather than making it quietly loop back to the beginning of the song, there's a noticeable pocket of dead silence in between the song ending and going back to the beginning. It's not too distracting, but it was a mild annoyance whenever I did notice it. Moving around is pretty good overall, with a pretty solid jump arc for getting around, and that's not even accounting for all the movement upgrades that you get later in the game. Shooting the enemies is pretty good as well. You have 8 directions to fire at, with a very useful ability to plant your feet on the ground to aim at a specific angle, all of which gets more depth with the more upgrades you collect along the way. The character upgrades come in 3 types. On the exploration side, you get a laser drill that will allow you to break through specific blocks and search for secrets. There's the unique spin on the morph ball in the form of a remote drone to explore areas that are too small for Trace to fit into, complete with his own little beam attack. Though the one ability you'll be using all throughout the game is the Field Disruptor, as it adds a layer of environmental manipulation to the game along with just being really cool. The ability lets you glitch enemies and objects in the environment into useful variants of themselves, or to make it easier to get past these obstacles. Just as an example, this centipede-like enemy darts back and forth, but glitching it would turn the path that it flies through into traversable platforms. Every enemy in the game reacts differently to being hit by this thing, so it's always fun to see what will happen. I think my favorite effect in the game is this robot that turns into missing no when you glitch it. Pretty rad. Movement upgrades start off simple enough with the ability to jump up higher, but then things get wild when you get the lab coat. With this, Trace can clip through walls that he can walk into, and with upgrades to this, giving Trace way more vertical movement. And speaking about vertical movement, you get a grappling hook. And it's pretty good. The last type is the upgrades to the Axiom Disruptor itself. All throughout the game you get alternate firing modes for the blaster, with each one alternating on a spectrum of emphasizing power or range. Firing modes that are short to mid-range hit really hard but can be a pain to use when you need distance between you and the enemy. Long-range attacks deal less damage, but can be useful if there's a swarm of low-health enemies from afar. It's also just fun to get a new firing mode, just to see what it looks like, even if you don't find it useful in combat. So many of them just look pretty cool on top of being fun to use. Also, all the beam abilities get stronger throughout the game, with items that increase the flat damage on all of the firing modes, so no one singular firing mode completely replaces the other. The strength of this game is in the level design. The Metroidvania genre is generally known for open forms of exploration, and in the case of Axiom Verge, the levels do a great job with placing points of interest that the player will have to revisit later down the line. A great example is when you make it to the upper section of Kerr, which is inaccessible until you get the lab coat, but instead of just having those blocks sit there just to impede the player, there's also a power-up that anyone would want to collect, imprinting in the average player's mind that a seemingly mundane part of the level geometry is special and to come back to it later. Though on the subject of backtracking, what I found impressive is that it's kept to a tasteful minimum early on, as the majority of early areas keep pushing you forward. That's not to say that there isn't any in the game, but until you get past the first third of the game or so, the backtracking is limited to the same area, or to an adjacent area to the one that you're currently in. Once you get the grappling hook, the game world starts to open up since you'll have access to the massive hallway that connects the majority of the game world together. There is the issue of getting lost, but after getting through the first third of the game, I found that backtracking wasn't too much of an issue if you run back to the early areas of the game with all the new abilities that you'll have acquired by then. Despite the map going for a more minimalist look, it does do a good job in showing what chunks of the map that you haven't explored yet. But if you do run into a brick wall, you could always just put one of two markers on the map at the point where you couldn't get past and return to it later with new abilities. There's also the lack of fast travel in the game, which I know will be an immediate turnoff to some people. The substitute for this is the previously mentioned massive hallway connecting the majority of the game world together. Since each area isn't too big, I feel like this option does work in minimizing the travel time, but I do understand people being bothered by the lack of fast travel, even as an option. Though in terms of areas themselves, I found a majority of them to be pretty fun to traverse. Except for Ukina. This area has the gimmick of having you initially go through the level while hallucinating. It's a very well executed moment in the game. Gold clap, gold clap. However, you then have to re-explore this area to get the next mandatory upgrade. And it's here that I ran into a problem. Because the map is a little too minimalist, it's possible to get stuck in this area until you get that upgrade. It's all because this one corner of the map that you never touch when running through the area for the first time around will be red as if you had already been there. So for a good while I was just running back and forth until I was effectively forced to consult a guide. Though I guess on a positive note, the game is idiot-proofed, so you can't go to this next area without a vital upgrade, so I guess gold clap for that? And when it comes to the areas in general, I think the only one that I actively dislike are the secret levels in the game. Darted throughout the game world are hidden levels that have messy level geometry and have the appearance of being fed through an old CRT monitor. While I like the inclusion, the fact that the locations of these areas are completely random is a massive turnoff when it comes to 100%ing the game, especially with these levels containing secret beam weapons, so the scavenger hunt just to find these entrances just isn't worth it unless you're a completionist. Throughout the game there will be plenty of bosses to go up against, many of which tower over the player. They have some crazy designs and they put emphasis on the techno-organic nature of the world, and most of the fights are pretty fun. Actually, I noticed a few of them were pretty easy with the right beam types. The scorpion-looking one is a cakewalk if you use the Hypno-Animizer. The only one I legitimately had a problem with is this giant hornet-looking boss. Since the majority of its body has armor plating, the boss is only vulnerable when its mouth is open, but until that point, it can bash you to death with its massive body. Taking this one down felt more like a crapshoot, as I was spamming the one beam that I had with the most range just to take this flying bastard down. There's also the annoyance that outside of a niche use in the fight against Orku, you don't actually use the glitching mechanic to directly gain an advantage in any of the fights. Bar the final boss, but I'll get to that later. So with the bizarre setting and strange alien creatures that you deal with on this alien world, that begs the question, what's actually going on here? Well, the main story involves Trace being isekai'd to a different world that's on the verge of collapse, as several ancient machines with human faces that give off heavy Shodan vibes guide you throughout Sudra and give you the task of taking down the man that destroyed this world, who goes by Athetos. You'll come to find that Athetos has killed the entire population of this world by poisoning the atmosphere, and you'll also start noticing some mysterious figure that's always outside of your limited view, only to come to the harsh realization that you are just as mortal as the people who died, and that same poison is slowly killing your character, warping your sense of reality. That character that you noticed was a sign that Trace's brain was succumbing to the alien pathogen. This is one hell of a trippy moment that's one of the best moments in the game, all culminating in a reverse boss fight against the mysterious figure as your brain is on the verge of dying. Anyhow, I'm gonna go more into detail into the later parts of the game, so if you want to avoid spoilers, skip to here. Okay then. So throughout the game, you're left with the question as to how an explosion ended with you being teleported to an alien world. Trace finds out that there is a gap in his memory and regains this lost information after his near-death experience. After the explosion, he had a breakthrough with his research during his recovery period on the existence of different worlds, the same type of research that would lead him to Sudra. However, his studies on interdimensional travel barred some controversy and gave him the mocking nickname of Athetos. After a while, you eventually come to learn that all of the bosses that you've been fighting throughout the game were all just clones of Athetos, with a failed clone coming out of a similar machine to the device that you've been respawning from. So now the dirty laundry has been aired out. You can speak your mind to these stationary machines and regain control of this story. Huh. Yeah, your allies are hardly the good guys in this conflict, with Elsinova being able to casually kill you if you piss her off. Turns out that despite Elsinova's hatred of any form of Athetos, Trace included, you begrudgingly have to work together to at least shut down the device that's destroying the planet. There's more information to discover, like the translation for the various lore tablets, giving more insight into the world, a handful of secret guns, which includes a motherfucking flamethrower, and a secret room containing an out-of-place wheelchair, and a note written by the original Trace before becoming Athetos. But going back to the main story, the tides start to turn when you discover the machines that you've been working with have mechanical bodies that are massive in size, and through some meddling you give them the freedom to start moving again. Combined with the knowledge that they see the only other human on this planet as an obstacle and their disregard for you if you pose a threat, it's not too hard to conclude that helping them is effectively opening up Pandora's box, but you're not really given that much of an option. After tearing through a final area with a level theme that freaking slaps, you confront Athetos and figure out what was going through his mind when he casually eradicated an entire planet's population. It turns out all the knowledge that he acquired on Sudra was minuscule in comparison to the greater knowledge out there in the universe far past the breach. The problem was that if he broke down the barrier, he would also free the machines, who would pose an even larger threat to him and even the universe as a whole. So the plan was to wait things out until the whole planet effectively died, then leave. But unfortunately, our Trace was brought into the equation, and he doesn't forgive someone for doing a genocide run. The boss fight with Athetos is alright. It's a simple battle that's slightly elevated by the spectacle of the arena moving up into the sky, though on a side note, this is the only boss where you can directly glitch the enemies that spawn in. It's pretty cool. An underlying theme of the game is inevitability. Most of the major characters show this in some way, trying to avoid a terrible fate that's presumed to happen to them. This is shown through Athetos failing to prevent his death, which was written on the wall at that point, but could also apply to Elsinova and Trace. At the end of the game, Elsinova knocks Trace out to give him the ending that he asked for, a return to normalcy, but the attempt to avoid making another Athetos didn't work. Trace showed signs of becoming him throughout the game by manipulating life on this planet, treating them as data to be analyzed and used for his own goals. This is emphasized by the fact that he still goes down the path of trying to travel back to Sudra. And if you get more than 80% of the items in the game, then you get a secret ending where Trace is woken up from the dream that he was forced into by the part of his mind that would eventually become Athetos. There's also the unsubtle reference to the Garden of Eden from the Bible, with the act of breaking through the breach to gain knowledge being directly presented as attaining a forbidden fruit, or acquiring forbidden knowledge, with Elsinova's serpent-like body sealing the deal. It's an interesting story overall, which can be further fleshed out with the optional lore tablets, which I haven't even gone into. Oh yeah, this game got a randomizer added in. It's pretty much what you expect from the title. It swaps out the weapon types that you find throughout the game, and I haven't played much of it, but seeing an item from the mid to late game at the beginning of the adventure is pretty wild. If you like speedrunning the game and you like replay value, well, this is pretty much perfect for you. This game goes for about $20 on all platforms. That's a bit much, as most indie games in the same vein as Axiom Verge can go for around $15 or so. The game is good enough to somewhat warrant that price, but waiting for a sale is still recommended. Also, a sequel was released this year. I haven't played it yet, but the trailers look really good, so I might pick it up when I get the chance. Maybe I'll even review it if there's enough demand for it in the comments. Anyhow, this is the Renegade Master. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Peace out.